So we're continuing on in our first unit, looking at some of the fundamentals of logic, argumentation, rhetoric. Last time we looked at, properties of arguments, right? We talked about how arguments are a series of statements. What does that mean? They're a particular sentence that has a truth value. They're either true or false. And arguments can be good or bad. They can be valid or invalid, sound or unsound. And we talked about different kinds of reasoning, inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. What I tried to impress upon you is that, if you're going to be rational, if you're going to provide arguments, you should try to provide arguments that are valid. What was that again? If an argument is valid, what does that mean? That's going to be later. It's going to be built on validity. Right, yeah. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. We contrasted that with invalid. Invalid arguments could have true premises and a false conclusion, false premises and a true conclusion. And then building off of that, we talked about soundness. A sound argument is one that is valid and true. So its premises are true and its conclusion is true. All this stuff is important to know as fundamentals of, what we're investigating in this class. Logic, argumentation, rationality, and its place in human life. We're continuing in that vein today by talking about logical fallacies that come up. What are the different fallacies that people use when they're making arguments? Well, that's what we're going to investigate today. We're not going to go through all of the fallacies, all of the logical fallacies that exist, but we're going to talk about a good number of them today. I'm going to try to provide some examples for you so you can better understand how logic is being misused or misapplied altogether. And hopefully this will help form your foundational understanding of these things moving forward. Yeah? Okay, so let's get into it. What exactly is a logical fallacy? Did y'all do your reading? I know it wasn't very exciting. None of these first few classes are going to be riveting. I'm sorry. What's a logical fallacy? Yes. Yeah, I would say, the spirit of that is right. Although this is another thing that you're going to want to pay attention to as you give arguments and you analyze them, especially in philosophy. Be very careful and precise with the words that you use. Because a lot of the terms that we're going to be invoking that are pretty common in everyday speech have technical definitions within this field. But basically that's right. A logical fallacy is the use of invalid or improper reasoning in the formation of an argument. The way that the authors present this is as follows. Bad arguments that happen so often, we've given them names. And we're going to go through a bunch of these today. What are some bad arguments that people use? What are some improper ways to respond to arguments? Because as we'll see, each of the fallacies that we're going to look at involves either invalid reasoning or the improper application of reason and logic. Okay? As we'll see, this is kind of a meta point, taking a step back. Oftentimes, logical fallacies end up misapplying reason, or they use reason to distract from the overall point that the person is trying to make. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of fallacies, a lot of different types. But I'm sure you've all had experiences with them. And each one of us has probably used them too without realizing it. So hopefully after today you'll have a better understanding of what these are and how to avoid them and how to spot them in other people's arguments. Because if we care about being logical and rational and providing justifications for our views, we're going to want to look out for these and try not to use them ourselves. Makes sense, right? So, I want to add something of a caveat to this. While we want to be on the lookout for improper reasoning and logical fallacies, we have to keep in mind that just because somebody uses a logical fallacy, that doesn't mean that what they're saying is false. You can use a logical fallacy in an argument and your conclusion can still be true. So, perhaps we should care about logical fallacies, we should try to avoid them, but I would argue, as a philosopher, what we care even more about is truth and the expression of truth. An accurate description or explanation of what's going on and why. So, be on the lookout for these. Try to internalize these. We don't want to use them ourselves. We should rightly point out when somebody uses them. But just keep in mind that just because there's a logical fallacy there doesn't mean that the person is ultimately wrong. Okay? Just keep that in mind. We care about the expression of truth. We want to say true things. We want to get to the bottom of things. But we also want to provide good reasons and justifications for our views too. And that's kind of what this class is about. I am not going to try to provide you what I think is an accurate description of reality. I'm not going to try to share my personal views with you or beliefs about anything. What we're primarily concerned about in this class, is justification, reasoning, proper rationalization. And I hope that by going through this stuff, I give you some tools that you can use to better analyze arguments and better justify your own views. And have better, more meaningful, moving discussions with others. Make sense? Cool. All right. So let's get into it. The book goes over a bunch of different fallacies. There are, hundreds of them, if not thousands of them. All, with their own little characteristics and variations. We're not going to go over all of them. We're just going to go through the big ones today. Okay? The first one we're going to talk about is the red herring. Does anybody know what this fallacy involves? What do you recall from your reading?
It's when someone's making one argument and you just make a totally different argument to distract from the point.
That is primarily what's going on. When there's a red herring, there's a distraction of the overall point. The person has missed the point, or they've brought up something that's not relevant to the logic or the discussion at hand. Exactly. There's a little red herring on a plate. Ain't it cute? It's a fallacy which involves redirecting one's attention from the relevant issue or theory or topic to something else. So, for example, say I'm giving you an argument and I'm telling you about the health effects of pesticides and herbicides and all the stuff that we're adding to our food. And I say this to you. Farmers shouldn't use pesticides in their crops. I give this argument to you, I give you reasons. If you responded to me by saying, but people need to eat fruits and vegetables, that's a necessary part of a good diet. Are you saying farmers should stop producing crops? That would be an example of a red herring, right? This has nothing to do with the logic of the argument, right? The logic of the argument is, hey, these things that we're putting on our crops aren't good for human health. We're not saying farmers shouldn't produce crops. We're not saying farmers shouldn't grow fruits and vegetables. So this is an easy way that we often misunderstand, misrepresent views, and our conversations don't go anywhere. Because people often bring up things that are irrelevant to the point at hand. Do you see how this is irrelevant to this? This does not necessarily follow from this. This is not the argument that the person is making. Could you provide another example? Use your critical thinking skills. Right? That's what this class is all about. Somebody give me an argument and I'll respond in a way that's a red herring. Just make a claim. Yeah?
Cereal is a soup.
You said cereal is a soup?
Yeah.
You're saying I shouldn't eat cereal? I should eat cereal at dinner time because it's a soup? If people don't eat soup for breakfast, you're saying I got to eat it for supper. No, right? That has nothing to do with what you said, right? You're making some sort of ontological claim about the nature of cereal, and I'm talking about eating habits or social customs, right? Yeah, perfect. Or how about this? Let's say I said, communism is the ideal socioeconomic system. And you respond with, so you don't care about the American people? How are those connected? Right? We could get there, right? Maybe through a long series of rationalizations, but those two things are disconnected in the instance that we're looking at. Right? Yes, good. So this is one that comes up a lot. Because we often don't get what the other person's saying. We're not latching on to the point or the line of argument, or people respond to us in that way. And then we go in circles. Logical fallacy number 1, red herring. This one is another one that comes up a lot, the straw man. What does this logical fallacy involve?
Misrepresenting the opposing argument is something that's easy to take down.
Exactly. Yes. When somebody is involved in straw manning, basically they misrepresent the person's argument and they kick down that straw man. They defeat the misrepresentation and think they've defeated the original argument. Yeah, it necessarily involves like a misrepresentation of the person's view, okay, or the argument that they're making. It's also called the easy target fallacy in the book. It's a fallacy which involves misrepresenting one's argument, showing that the misrepresentation is false, which implies that the person's original position is false. Could you all give me an example of this one? Make a claim. I'll straw man you. You like the color blue? How about something, I don't know, more controversial? And yeah. Coffee is bad for you. You're saying that coffee is going to kill me? What? No, right? That's not what you said, right? That wasn't your view. You said coffee is bad for you. I pray to God it's not, because I'm drinking it right now. But you see my misrepresentation? I changed your position. I presented your position as if you're saying, if you drink coffee, it's going to kill you. Yeah, that's a straw man. How about another one?
Water is wet.
Water is wet? Now that could lead to a whole philosophical discussion. I'm actually of the opinion that water is wet, but water is wet. Choose a different one. That one's hard to misrepresent.
I thought so, but I thought I'd say that, man.
How about another one? Yeah.
So it's just we giving examples like any example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pit bulls are could not be a pit, like an in-house pit.
What does that mean?
Dog, like,
Okay. So,
You know what I'm
yeah.
They say they too dangerous, but you never know because it all depends on how they raise you.
So pit bulls are too dangerous to keep as a house pet.
Yeah.
Maybe you're trying to give me that argument. Are you saying pit bulls are going to rip my child's throat out? Right? That's not what you said. Right? That's a misrepresentation. A gross misrepresentation of your view. Yeah. This one's really easy. People do it all the time. We do it all the time, probably on accident. Right? Yeah. Here's the example I came up with. Let's say somebody gives you the argument, the U.S. government should prioritize taking care of their own citizens before others. And somebody says, you're saying the U.S. shouldn't help out other countries? What? No, that's not what the person said, right? They just said we should prioritize helping our people before other nations. Not we shouldn't give aid to Ukraine or Kenya or wherever it is, right? Those two things could both be true. We take care of our people first and we also help others. Yeah, this is a misrepresentation of what the person is saying. Not too tough, right? The difficulty comes with spotting these. Because language is a little fuzzy. We don't all have the same definitions for words, right? I'm willing to bet my life we don't all have the same definition of oppression. So it's difficult to spot these in the wild. It can be difficult, especially to spot that if you're doing it yourself. Because people don't like to be wrong. You don't want to be wrong or told that you're wrong, all that stuff. How about this one? The appeal to fear. Ugh. How does this one go? Yes.
You make an argument like presenting the bad consequence that will happen.
Exactly, right? It's normally used as, I don't know, like a threat or blackmail or something, right? Yeah, it doesn't attack the logic of the argument. Instead, what it says is, I don't like what you're saying and what you're going to do. You got a bad thing coming if you do that, buddy. Right? Yeah. It's a fallacy which involves, someone claiming something bad will happen to another, rather than refuting the logic of the argument. Can you think of an example of this? This one might be a little tougher, require a little bit more thought. Maybe my example will help. Yeah?
If we don't give money to Ukraine, Russia's going to nuke New York City.
Yeah. That could be one. How about this? Let's say that a shopkeeper is like, I think it's fair to charge everybody the same price. That's what I'm going to do. It's good for business. It's fair. People aren't going to gossip about my shop and say I'm cheating them. Good idea. And then some mafia members don't like that. And they say, well, if we don't get a little discount, buddy, who knows what's going to happen to your store? Right? They're not refuting the logic. They're not thinking, is that fair? Why would that be fair? What are the conditions of fairness? They're saying, we don't like that. We're going to fuck you up unless you give us some free shit. Right? Appeal to fear. Yeah. Instead of interrogating the logic or the rationale, you basically say, that's bad because it's going to be bad for someone. That might be relevant in some discussions, but a lot of the time, it's a fallacy. This one makes sense, right? You hear this a lot, especially if you've seen movies or TV shows around organized crime, right? Peaky Blinders, that kind of stuff. Great show. Breaking Bad, I don't know. One that's related to this is the appeal to what? It's a P word. Appeal to... This one comes up a lot in education, actually.
Pity.
Appeal to pity, right. And how does that one go, Nick? You remember?
Like, you try to make the person feel bad just so that they would accept the premise of the argument.
Right, exactly. Instead of interrogating or refuting the logic of the argument, the person tries to make you feel bad for them so that you'll do something else. For example, in response to a professor's argument that a student's grade is based on their performance in the class, a student might say, if I don't get at least a B, I'm going to lose my scholarship. That might be true, but it's not trying to refute the professor's argument, right? It's not addressing the argument. It's just saying, I don't like the argument because it's going to have a bad impact on me. You should feel bad for me, and so you should change your mind. But this is an appeal to emotion, right? Like the appeal to fear is. It's not an appeal to rationality or logic. Now, I'm not saying we should be cold calculating computers all the time. But if we're concerned with being rational and logical, this is stuff that we should watch out for. It may be practical to use logical fallacies to do things that you think are good sometimes. For example, if you think that a certain bill is going to help the American people and you're a politician, you might use logical fallacies to get the bill passed because you think that takes precedence over being completely consistent and rational. Right? But if we care about being consistent and logical and rational, as we are going to try to do in this class, we should avoid these. We should avoid appeals to emotion. Y'all remember this one from the reading? Appeal to popularity. This one comes up a lot. And a lot of people don't even realize it. Yeah, Blaze?
Like more people will say this, so this is right.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, look at a whole bunch of people agree with this and think this and follow this. There's a consensus, right? The view's popular, so it must be right. Well, does that follow? No. Right? If you're an atheist, you think half the world is wrong. It doesn't matter how popular the view is. Right? If you're a Christian, you think 90% of the world is wrong. Right? Doesn't matter how popular their view is. Just because a view is popular does not necessarily make it true. Humans get a lot of stuff wrong. Okay? And, to tie it back to our previous lecture, there might be incentives to produce or express consensus, even though that's not where the logic leads or where the truth is. So yeah, here I have an awesome picture from Mean Girls, everybody's favorite movie. I've only seen it once. The appeal to popularity is a fallacy which involves presuming a view is true because a lot of people believe it or a lot of people hold it. For example, in response to a discussion about religion and the truth of religion, someone might say, well, the majority of Americans are Christians, so that must mean Christianity is true. Well, does that mean Christianity is true just because a lot of people believe it? No. I mean, think about even the project of science, something that we think is certain and firm and conclusive. That is an ongoing process, right? Figuring out how reality works? Scientific views change. Scientific consensus and knowledge evolves over time. Humans used to think that the Earth was the center of our solar system, right? But we know that's not true now. So just because a view is popular doesn't necessarily make it true. It might give you a reason to think that you should look into it, right? Consensus was one of the things that we brought up last time that might give you a reason to think that it's true. But just because there's consensus or the view is popular does not necessitate that it's true, right? Those two things are completely disconnected. I can see you jumping out of your seats now. So captivating. I know. Or how about this one? The appeal to novelty. This actually happens sometimes in the scientific disciplines. A new view comes out. Somebody does a study or engages in some research and they provide this new view and they're like, look, I have this evidence for this. And what do people do? They're like, oh, that's it, man. That's the view. It's new. That is it, man. This is what the appeal to novelty is, right? It's a fallacy which involves presuming a view is true because it's new. But what do we all know? Just like the last fallacy, just because a view is new doesn't mean necessarily that it's true. Can you all think of an example? There have been so many of these throughout the decades in diet science, right? Dietetics. Oh, the new view is that eggs are bad for you. Can't eat eggs anymore. Oh, and then a year later, eggs are good for you, we found out. Oh, yep, eggs are good for you. That's the new one, right? How many studies have there been on whether coffee is good for you? A ton that say one thing, and then it's contradicted by a new study, and blah, 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 blah. What's a new view that you've heard? Have you heard any of your friends make this appeal to novelty?
I think like a few years ago I heard something on the news that like ham increases your chance of getting cancer or something.
Okay. And everybody jumped on the bandwagon and they were like, yep, down with pork. Big pork's trying to get us to die early, or I don't know.
I mean, not really, it's in class. So, and then my friends were like, well, breathing increases your chance of getting cancer. So.
Yeah. Have you all heard of dihydrogen monoxide?
Yeah.
Everybody who has ever come into contact with this substance has died. It's responsible for thousands of deaths every year. Dihydrogen monoxide is water. Yeah. So there are a lot of silly things that you can do with language and representing views. But yeah, just because a view is new does not mean it's true. To invoke a previous example, let's say you're talking with somebody about the Earth and its position in the solar system and what the Earth is like and its relationship to everything else. Somebody says, there's new scientific view based on evidence that the Earth is flat. So it must be true. Well, no. Right? Just because it's new doesn't mean it's true. And unfortunately, this is one that we end up seeing a lot in those fields that are trying to expand our human knowledge. Right? People will jump on the bandwagon and get behind a view just because it's the latest thing. Think of like the latest diet trends, right? All that stuff. What's all the rage now? Like keto? Keto's the best thing in the world for you? And then you have this documentary that came out on Netflix that's like, any animal products increases your risk of death and disease. Vegan is the way to go. So, new views are popping up all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're true. We got to think, people. Got to look at the evidence, carefully weigh it, use our critical thinking skills. And another one that's invoked a lot, another appeal, is the appeal to tradition. Can you guess what this logical fallacy is going to say? How it works?
It's like, oh, this is the way it's always been, so why are you changing?
Exactly. This is the way it's always been, so it must be right. It must be good. Right? We've always used pens to write. That's what we've always done. So you can't use it for anything else. It's wrong, it's improper to use it for anything else. Or can you come up with another thing?
Classes always started at 11:10, so I was starting at later.
Class has always started at 11:10. That's the way it's always been. Yeah, we're not going to change class time to let students sleep longer, or because the professor doesn't know the start time. This is the way it's always been. It's good, it's true. Yes. It's a fallacy which involves saying, basically like, look, this is what we've been doing. This is what humans have been doing for a long time and thinking and believing for a long time. It's true because it's old and because we've been doing it a long time. And what's the question I'm going to ask you? What relationship is there between a view being old and a view being true? Very little? Nothing? I don't know. Right? Just because a view is old, or a practice or a custom has been in use for a long time, doesn't mean that it's right or good or true. Right? For a long time, slavery was the norm. Right? But we don't think that's cool anymore. Right? We don't do that in the U.S. Unless you want to start talking about economics and you're like, we're all wage slaves. Shut up, Professor Gunner, but we can talk about that later. So, for example, this is a debate that I was raised Protestant, Lutheran. I went to church with my dad like every week. And the synod that our church was a part of, the Wells Synod, had this debate come up again and again about what a woman's proper place is in the church. And what do you think they said? These conservatively minded Christians. Yeah, women can be teachers. They're not allowed to be on the church council. They're not allowed to preach. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it's going to be because that's right. Okay? But just because that's the way it's been doesn't mean it's true, right? The Catholic Church has always excluded women from the priesthood, so they must be right to do that. Well, humans are fallible, okay? We have incorrect beliefs sometimes. Just because an idea or a practice has been in play for a long time doesn't necessarily mean it's right or good or true. Should we introduce now an important caveat? A practice or a view being instantiated for a long time might give you a good reason to think there's some wisdom there. But that's like a deeper level of thinking about this issue, right? What we're concerned mostly with is this surface level explanation stuff that we're going through. How about the appeal to authority? How does this one go?
I think it's just like when someone like for example, like the president, like if Joe Biden says like, you know, destroy all ice cream shops, which he would never.
Right.
Like, if he said that.
He's like, I have had a change of heart. I hate ice cream. All ice cream should go bye-bye.
I mean, he would say something like that, but like, but people would say like,
Exactly, right? This fallacy involves basically saying, look, somebody in authority said this, so it must be true. They must know what they're talking about. But that's not necessarily the case, right? Take me, for example. I'm technically your professor, your teacher, so I have some sort of authority over you. But I could say wrong stuff, right? And you shouldn't trust what I say just because I'm your professor, right? That kind of contradicts the whole point of this class. What am I trying to get you to do?
Use your brain.
Think for yourself, right? Yes, exactly. So I think I'm giving you good information, but you should think about this stuff and you should investigate it. Just because someone is in a position of authority doesn't mean they know what they're talking about, or what they're saying is true, or that their argument is a good one. There are lots of ways for people to get into positions of authority. Okay? Yes. It's a fallacy which involves assuming a view is true because a person in authority said it. Or assuming their position is their, how you might say, rejection of a position is true because they're a person in authority. Yeah, do you have a question?
No,
Okay. So how about this? In a discussion about foreign affairs, someone says, well, the president said that we should support those people across the pond. He's the president, so he must know what he's talking about. Maybe, I don't know. Have you thought about it? Have you looked at the evidence? Have you weighed the pros and cons of international economic policy? I don't know. So, something that Plato's been getting at in his works, got at in his works thousands of years ago, applies to us today. Simply accepting convention, accepting what people in political or social or religious authority say to you without investigating it or thinking about it yourself ain't cool. Okay? People get stuff wrong. Sometimes people have incentives to say things and misrepresent things. You should be thinking about that. A person's authority is not necessarily guarantee that they're smart, wise, whatever. Yeah? Makes sense? I know I'm really, beating you over the head with this over and over again and repeating myself a lot, but hopefully it sticks in your brains if I do that enough. And I repeat and I repeat and I repeat. Another one the book looks at is this, the ad hominem fallacy. What is this?
Attacking the person that said it rather than the argument they said.
Attacking the person instead of the argument. Yes, exactly. Right? I think former President Trump is a doo-doo head, so what he says is stupid. I think he's bad, so what he says must be wrong. No, right? Somebody can have a bad character, or you could dislike something about someone, but that doesn't mean that their argument is wrong or their logic is faulty. Right. Look at that image I have. Attacking the person. Guilt by association is associated with this fallacy as well. What is that? Say that again? Yeah. It's like it references the fact that you hang out with someone who's bad. And so that person is like, oh, you're friends with former President Donald Trump? I'm not listening to what you have to say. No, just because you hang out with someone or you're a friend with someone does not necessarily make you a bad person or make you what you say wrong. Okay? These are separate questions, distinct issues. Thus, I define it as follows. A fallacy which involves attacking the character of the person rather than the argument. So, in response to a discussion in which a politician, Mr. Smith, argues for raising taxes. Someone responds with, "Mr. Smith is always scheming. Since we can't trust him, we shouldn't raise taxes." Or, "Mr. Smith was interviewed by a member of the alt-right. We can't trust what he says." Those two things are logically disconnected, right? It's not cool, logically speaking, to attack somebody's character instead of their argument. If you care about being rational and logical, you got to hit the argument. You got to interrogate the argument. The person's character is logically disconnected from the logic of what they're saying. Can somebody give another example? Have you ever seen this happen? In real time, Yannick?
The Republican debates, Trump does it all the time.
Okay, so yeah, what does he say?
Romney sanctimonious, lying Ted, little Marco, he just calls them names.
Just calls them names instead of addressing the pros and cons and logic of their policy, their platform? Yeah. It is a useful rhetorical move, right? When we get to rhetoric, you'll see there are a bunch of things that you can do in order to make the world in your image. But normally they're fallacies, logical fallacies. They involve the use of words to achieve some sort of end, but they appeal to emotions, or they attack the character, or they distract. They're not actually looking at what's being said and the logic and rationale of it. Yeah, can you think of another example? Y'all feel like you got this one? Yeah?
Bill Clinton wasn't a good president because he went to Epstein Island.
Right, yeah. What Bill Clinton says about international policy is wrong, because I know he was on that plane. Right? No, the fact that he was on the manifest, let's say, I don't know if he was, is disconnected from the logic of his international policy. Right? Yeah. So this one happens a lot. It happens a lot in politics. It happens a lot in Congress, on the news, and the TV. You'll see it all the time. Okay? Does anybody remember this one from the reading, the genetic fallacy? It's not talking about race or anything like that. Does anybody remember what this fallacy is all about? It's kind of similar to the ad hominem. When people use ad hominem, they often do this too.
I don't exactly know, but I'll take a guess. Maybe is it like if you're arguing with it's genetic, so if you're arguing with your family member and they bring up something, you can be like, "Oh, you're my family member. Like, how could you do this to me? Like, you're supposed to." Or am I just completely wrong?
The spirit is kind of there. It involves trying to criticize somebody's position based on where it came from. You can see how that's connected to what you said, right? Yeah. I got a little cool double helix for you. Look at my amazing clip art skills. It's a fallacy which involves dismissing or accepting a view merely based on its origins. So, that scientist is an atheist. Because he's an atheist, I know what he says is completely wrong. That argument that he gave came from an atheist person. It's wrong. Well, you can't just accept or dismiss a view like that if you're trying to be rational. Okay? Just because a view came from somewhere you didn't like doesn't mean that it's wrong. Right? Let's say in a response to a discussion about art, what philosophy would call the field of aesthetics, of beauty. Someone says, Well, your view is obviously wrong since you're not an artist. And my view is right since it's based on Picasso's own opinion. And he's an artist, and you're not an artist. Just because a view about art originates from a non-artist doesn't mean that their argument is wrong or that their logic is flawed. Right? How about another example? Oh, a Republican brought up that point, so it must be wrong. Right? No, that person could be right. Their logic could be fine. You have to look at the argument. All right, now you give me one. Uh-huh.
My logic and argument teacher told me so it must be right.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, Professor Gunner said it, so it must be right. Yeah, exactly. There you go, using your critical thinking skills, yeah. Just because a view originates from me or doesn't originate from me has no bearing on whether it's true. Okay? You got to look at the argument. Again, it's about looking at the logic, interrogating the logic. Not interrogating the character of the person who said it. Not interrogating where it came from. Not interrogating whether it's old or new. Yeah, exactly. You've heard of this one, right? The slippery slope fallacy. What's this one? Ooh. Sliding down a slippery slope, right? Yes?
It's like if you let like one thing happen, then this is going to happen.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. We can't do that or think that because that's going to result in this, and that's going to be bad for that, and that's going to result in that and that and that, and that's bad. Yeah. There he is, sliding down the slippery slope. It's a fallacy which involves dismissing an argument or a view because allowing it will, it is claimed, undoubtedly lead to one or more undesirable outcomes. Yeah. So, for example, in response to a discussion about pornography, someone says, if we make pornography illegal, then people will become sexually frustrated and destroy society. We have to keep porn legal. Do you know that it's going to result in these bad outcomes? Do you have good reason to believe that? Even if it does result in bad outcomes, does that mean that the logic is flawed? As we know, the logic or the rationale of something is distinct from its application in reality. Right? Now, if something does lead to undesirable outcomes, that might give you a reason to say we shouldn't do that. But that doesn't mean that the logic is flawed or that their argument is invalid. Does that make sense? So this one's a little trickier because oftentimes when we are talking about policy and ideas and views, oftentimes it's relevant and it's a good idea to bring up how that policy is going to affect people. But then we're talking about something else. We're not talking about the logic or the rationale or the argument. We're talking about its application in reality. So, while that's important, it's a slightly different thing than the inherent rationality of the position or the argument. Make sense? Appeal to ignorance. Did you read about this one? I think it was in your text. How does this one go? Anybody remember? Yeah.
Like they argue that something's true because the opposite's not true.
Yeah. It's a fallacy which basically involves claiming a position is true because the opposite has not been shown to be false. if that makes sense, if you can follow all those negatives in that sentence. So, for example, I think an example will help. In a response to a discussion about physics, someone says, "No one knows exactly what resides in the quantum foam, so I'm pretty sure tiny goblins are running around down there." There are tiny goblins that exist in the quantum foam singing songs and playing harmonious melodies. No, right? Just because we haven't shown that there aren't tiny goblins there doesn't mean that there are. Right? Physics hasn't shown us that we don't live in a simulation, so I know we do. Well, no, just because something hasn't been demonstrated doesn't mean that the opposite is true. Right? Does this make sense? Can you think of another one? Yeah.
Maybe we haven't explored every part of the Bermuda Trench, so the one piece must be down there.
Exactly, yeah. Well, scientists, they haven't explored all of the ocean sea bottom. Yeah, the one piece is definitely down there. There's some devil fruit down there, and yeah. Yeah, how could we know that? How could we make that claim, right? Exactly. Another example? Yes?
I'd say like all space hasn't been discovered, so there must be aliens out there somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, look, astronauts haven't looked through every inch of space, so there are definitely aliens out there. ETs, they're among us. No, right? We can't prove that. Just because it hasn't been shown to be false doesn't mean the opposite is true. Science, inquiry, it's a process, right? It evolves. Our knowledge evolves. We haven't had time or all the resources to demonstrate everything. Okay? That doesn't mean that the opposite view is true. I think this might be the last one I have for y'all, but we'll see. Do y'all know this one, Mott and Bailey? This is an architectural image. It's based off of how humans used to organize themselves and the kind of structures they used to live in during medieval times. You remember reading about this? Was this in the book? This might be one that I added because it's one that happens a lot. It's similar to straw man. There's a picture of Mott and Bailey. I'll explain it here in a second. This fallacy involves someone putting forth a view that's vulnerable to critique, but when pressed on it, they retreat to a different, more defensible view. So it's based off this image of a Mott and Bailey, okay? The Bailey was where the people would tend to live and do their work and harvest their crops and till the land. And then when invaders would come, they would retreat to the Mott, a more defensible position, so they didn't get overrun and conquered. That action often happens intellectually. Somebody will put forth a view, and you're like, well, wait, that doesn't make sense here. And then they're like, well, what I meant with my view is really this. And they provide a more defensible view, changing their position mid-conversation. For example, Aaron says, I think that the U.S. government is morally obligated to redistribute its resources. When pressed on this view, Aaron falls back on, are you telling me life is fair for everyone? Shouldn't people be given a fair shot? That's not the same argument, right? That's not the same position. Aaron was making what we could call a socialistic or a communistic argument here. And then when pressed on it, he said he fell back to a more defensible but different view. Well, life's not fair for everybody. Well, yeah, that's true, but that's a different claim than this. Right? So this often happens a lot in conversation, especially around social and political and economic matters. Someone will put forth a view, and then another person will be like, well, wait, that has some flaws. What about this? And they'll retreat from the view, and they'll say something more defensible and try to make it look like, oh, my view was strong and good all along, and you don't have any good arguments. But this is like a trick, right? And oftentimes people don't do this consciously or intentionally. Okay? Oftentimes people do it without even realizing it. Could you all provide another example? Yes?
I think it's like, so this is long. So it's like if someone is having like a, say, Taylor Swift versus Kanye West debate.
Okay.
And the main point Taylor fan is making, or the Swiftie is making, is like, I think her music's better. And then the Kanye fan is like, oh, well, have you listened to both of their entire discographies? And then so she's like, well, he's a very controversial artist, and he's done all this stuff. And
Right. Exactly, right? The view changes. They put forth a different view that they think is more defensible. Right? Yeah, exactly. How about another one? I'm going to say something controversial, and then you poke a hole in it. Okay? Let me think of something. I know we're living in a simulation right now, a computer simulation. What do you have to say to that? We're living in a computer simulation. This is a giant fucking video game. And you say...
Who runs the simulation?
Who runs the simulation? Well, look, there's scientific evidence that our universe has holographic properties. Right? It's a different view that I'm now putting forth. Yeah, there is scientific evidence for that, but that doesn't mean we live in a video game and aliens are controlling it or whatever. Right? Yeah. Or how about this? There's no such thing as matter and objects independent of human perception. Everything's an idea in the mind.
Then
Yeah.
why does everyone see the same things?
Your senses can deceive you.
If I don't want this chair to exist, will it just go away?
Do you know that the chair is here when you're not in here? Right? Right? Yeah, you retreat to a more defensible position. Exactly. Yeah, you got it. Don't do that. Okay, don't do this. But you understand it? Try to be consistent. It makes sense, though? Okay, awesome. Oh, maybe one more. From a famous Latin phrase, non sequitur. Does anybody know what this means? You say you hate it? Oh, okay. Yeah, I hate it when people do this too. Does anybody know what this means? In Latin, it translates to, it does not follow. What the person is saying doesn't follow from their position or their argument or whatever. So I have a nice little path. And look, the path, you can't cut through, okay? A fallacy which involves jumping to a conclusion that does not logically follow from the premises. So for example, in response to a discussion about science, someone says, science has gifted us with a lot of knowledge. Scientific truths are the only ones we can reproduce. So science is the only way to discover how the universe works. This is true, right? Science has gifted us a lot of knowledge. Premise 1. Premise 2. Scientific truths are the only ones we can reproduce. Maybe a little iffy, I don't know. But assume these two are true. Does this follow? Science is the only reliable way to discover how the universe works. No, right? There might be other reliable ways. If by science we mean like observation and experiment, then what you'd say to this person is, what about mathematical proofs? That's a reliable way to understand how numbers and number theory and set theory works. But we're not running an experiment, right? What are you talking about? This does not follow from this. So, can you provide an example? How about this? Life is unfair. The top 1% have 90% of the world's wealth. So, we're morally obligated to kill them and their families and take their shit. No, does that follow? No. I mean, maybe you think it does. I don't know, but I tried to say something pretty strong, so it's... Can you provide an example? The lights are on. There's light streaming in through the room. So, the sun is producing all of the light in the room. Well, no, we have electricity. Ugh, right? All right, your turn. Somebody save me. Say something. Make up a nonsensical argument that doesn't follow. The conclusion doesn't follow. Yeah.
There's light in the room, so there must be people in it?
Yeah. There's light in the room, so there must be people in there. Well, no. Maybe somebody walked in here, grabbed something they forgot, and they walked out, and there's nobody in there. Triggered the lights. Yeah, exactly. One more. Give me one more. So I know you got it. Mm-hmm.
My cat's name is Zuko, and my cat likes to eat cat food, so therefore everybody that's named Zuko likes to eat cat food.
Exactly. Exactly. All you have to do is watch Avatar: The Last Airbender to know that's not true, right? He doesn't like to eat cat food, does he? He's not a cat, but yeah, exactly. So there you have it. These are some of the most common fallacies that pop up. There's something that you're going to want to internalize so that you can spot them, so that you can see when somebody is going astray, so that you can tell when the logic is flawed. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments? This makes sense? Okay, awesome. Well, then I'll let you all go. Do the reading for Thursday, and I will see you then. All right? Thank you, everybody, for coming.